Hey everybody. Wow, a lot of people here tonight, so I don't think we'll waste too much time. We'll get into it. Jean-Michel Jarre is here to talk about a number of things. We're glad you're here, and I'd like to welcome him to the stage. Jean-Michel.
Thank you. Really glad to be at Amoeba. I'm a great fan of this place, so thank you for coming. Thank you very much.
You know, we only have so much time to talk tonight, and as I was actually doing some preparation for this interview, I realized there was no way we were going to get to everything, so I figured we'd start at the beginning, get as far as we could, and then jump up to date, because there's some exciting stuff to talk about that is happening right now. So why don't we just go back a little bit to your introduction to music and your first memories of music, growing up in Lyon, and piano, I believe, was your first musical instrument.
Yeah, 1, 2, 1, 2, working. Nope. Yes, I have to talk loud then. 1, 2. Can you hear me without mic?
Yeah.
So I started piano, and it was quite a disaster because I hated my teacher, and I was writing on the wall of my bedroom, I hate piano. And that is probably the reason why I went to synthesizers afterwards, but actually it went better afterwards. She was quite a sadistic teacher, the kind of teacher keeping your fingers, you know. And but then it went all right 2 years later.
Well, what about the other stuff that was around? Can we get this fixed, by the way? Otherwise, I guess I'll just drop this one. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
Good idea.
Thank you. There's a technician in the crowd. What about the other stuff that was going on around you? Other things that were influencing you, like street performance and theater and stuff like that? Because obviously you're somebody who's brought a lot of different artistic forms into what you do. Tell us a little bit about that stuff.
Yeah, actually, after having studied the piano, I went into some local rock bands and discovered electronic music because I love to processing sounds. And even before studying electronic music. And I've also always been very involved in visuals, and I was also painting, and even hesitated between painting and music. And I always linked music with visual somehow. And in a very natural way, I think electronic music is linked with visual to me. And I've been probably one of the first ones to involve visuals at that scale in my performances. And we can see these days actually that visuals is everywhere as soon as we are talking about music performances.
What about your first experimentation with tape loops? Tell us about that. Tape loops, when you first started experimenting with loops.
Actually, I mean, today we can. You are talking about tape loops, right? And this technique is dated from the 1940s in France with a guy called Pierre Schaeffer, who is really the father, as probably some of you know, probably one of the first guy, I mean, who invented all. I mean, the loop. I mean, playing really with sounds. I mean, defining the idea that music is not based only on notes and based on solfeggio, but based on sounds and processing sounds. And actually, we all became after that kind of composers, but also sound designers. And these days we can do loops on softwares in seconds. But in those days, the only way to do loops were with tape, scissors, and sellotape, and with the mic stand, where you have to put the mic stand like this, and then the tape would play on the tape recorder, on the head of the tape recorder like this. And you have to calculate the BPM of what you want to do. I mean, by the speed. It was just a calculation with calculating the speed of the tape machine, and what did you want to create as a BPM, and then calculating in inch the first beat, the second beat, third beat, and so on and so forth. So it was quite a laborious technique. When you think in days, today you can do that instantly. But actually, on my one of my last album, Electronica, we did with Air, the French band Air, something similar. But we said, okay, on one track, why not visiting all the technique of part of the history of electronic music, and the beginning of this track called Close Your Eyes. I mean, we use this technique. I use this technique by the first loop has been made today, last year or 2 years ago with this technique. It was a big mistake because it took me 1 week of sweat, but I had to try to sync this with the computer. But we did it.
Let's try this one again. Okay, we got another microphone working good. You know, those early experimentations, what drove you to want to do that, though? What was it about that form of creativity, that experimentation? What drove you to want to create something new?
I don't know really. I think maybe my grandfather has had an influence on me. My grandfather was a very interesting man. He was a musician, a oboist, but it was also an inventor. He created one of the first mixing desks before the Second World War, and also one of the first portable turntable with a speaker in the cover, you see, where you could listen to jazz or Edith Piaf at picnic on Sunday afternoon. And it was the grandfather of the iPod. And so he influenced me a lot with this mixture of, technology and music, probably. And also, when I was younger and playing in rock bands, I loved to process the sound of my guitar, of my organ, and in playing the solos in reverse and all this kind of shit. I mean, it was really interesting and I was into this. And then, by chance, the drummer of this band his father was working in public radio in France, and where they had this fantastic music research center, which has been probably the first in the world to really experiment in a more professional way all different ways of experimenting with sounds, really. And the idea was for the first time, somebody was telling you, doing music, you can do music with a microphone like this, and going to the street, recording the sound of the wind, the sound of the rain, the sound of the street, and making music with it. And that was actually at that moment totally revolutionary. Now every DJ is doing it, but in those days, I mean, he was the first one, and we owe these people from the mid 20th century everything, because the music we are doing today in a rather traditional way is coming from these guys and from this period.
When did the Moog enter your life, the Moog synthesizer? Because that was the instrument you've been waiting for.
Yes, when I got a bit of money, because on a French and European point of view, a Moog was like a Ferrari, you know. And so the first synth I've got was a British one called the VCS3. Was a poor version of a Moog. I say poor in terms of ingredients, maybe, but in terms of concept, it's one of the most interesting synth ever made. And actually, in a very symbolic way, I sold my electric guitar and my amp to go to London and purchase this first synth. And that was my first synth. And the Moog went afterwards. And obviously, but you know, it's very interesting. It's like an acoustic, like Gibson and Fender, for instance. I mean, every synth has its own sound, its own character. Is the reason why that I have quite a lot of, through time, I have quite a lot of instruments in my studio now. It's more and more difficult to get in, even, because it's full of stuff everywhere.
You know, once you had a few more tools, you were able to then start composing music for ballet and for television. For advertising as well. You're setting the table, so to speak, for recording your own albums. By the time you were ready for Oxygen, or Oxygene, excuse me, you were pretty much already somebody who was actively out there in France and in Europe and a well-known composer. When you set out to make that first record, the first Oxygen record, can you tell us what you were trying to achieve at that time with the equipment that you had and what you had learned?
Actually, Oxygen has not been really the first album I have done, but the first commercial success, definitely.
The first Oxygen.
And I was really interested in those days by trying to create this bridge between experimental music and pop, really, or considering that probably what's the most important I always consider that the most important thing in music is the melody, and whatever you do with experimentation, and by the end of the day, the melody is important. So I tried to create this bridge between pure experimentation and exploring new technique, and but also in the context of melody and with a kind of pop approach. And I think Oxygen has that kind of. I tried to create that bridge. And also with probably an influence of classical music, classical and rock. It's all the mixture, which is interesting in electronic music. I was saying that if rock and roll is born definitely in this country and is a kind of ethnic music from America that invaded the world. Definitely electronic music is born in continental Europe. Ethnic music always from Europe and invaded the world as well. And it's probably due to this influence of classical music, this long instrumental piece that we had as almost an heritage from classical music in Germany, in France, and continental Europe. I think it's certainly something which, when electronic music is born, it has nothing to do with jazz, blues, rock. It's something totally different. And I think that this is the reason why that the French scene, the German scene is pretty important, until these days.
What about that moment in time, though? You talk about the context of the music, but what about the context of the time, the early to mid-70s, 1976, a time of a lot of change, a time of social upheaval, but also a time when science fiction and the future were sort of colliding with reality as well. How did that fit into to the whole picture?
Actually, it's true that when I started doing music, it was in days where we had a kind of quite greed and quite optimistic vision for the future. We think that after year 2000, cars would fly and the social education system would be perfect. And we all know that we've been a bit disappointed after year 2000. And actually, it's like if we became a bit orphans of our future after year 2000, where we have no more vision. It's just these past 5-6 years that again, we have this kind now of lots of movies talking about the future. It took quite a while, but back in days of Oxygen, one of the reasons of the success probably is because this music has been instantly linked to a kind of idea of the future, a kind of almost a kind of Romanesque or hopes we all had towards the future, and also environment. When I started, Oxygen has this kind of dark and sunny side. There is a kind of melodic, happy approach, but also quite dark, like the cover. And it's interesting to see that in those days we were considered as dreamers or hippie if we were thinking about taking care of the planet. And today everybody is aware of this. And that was also this mixture of ecology, environmental issues, and vision of the future that makes Oxygen in the context of this period quite special.
With the success of that album, you followed it up with Equinox, and I guess at that time you really began to expand on the idea of not just how the music would be heard, but how it would be performed. And you began to make plans for what has been a career of some quite marvelous, huge experimentations in performing live as well. And in 1979, he played at the Place de la Concorde to what was then, I think, a record crowd of a million people. Tell us about that, and tell us about the planning that went into that, and then how you've continued to really push the boundaries with live performance and the spaces in which you do perform the music as well.
Yeah, actually, I always considered that electronic music was linked with outside. I don't know why. I mean, maybe because jazz or rock is probably a music for clubs where you are actually literally plugging yourself into the power to get the power in your stomach. Where electronic music, for me, was always linked with I don't know, landscapes and outdoor situation, and also another reason of involving visual at very early stage for me was the fact that I realized, because I love instruments, I love music instruments, and if you think about a violin, a clarinet, an electric guitar, a Gibson or Stratocaster, these instruments have been made for sharing, playing, before anything. And then later on we put microphones on them to record them in studio. Then they went from stage to studio. For electronic instruments, it's the reverse. The electronic instruments have been devised in laboratories, in studio, and then we tried to put them on stage. And at the beginning of my career, I mean, staying 2 hours behind synth is not the most sexy thing in the world, and you had to find something to try to share with the audience. The feeling, the emotions of the performance. When you are doing a guitar solo or something in front of the audience understands that what they hear is what the guy is doing. With electronic music, it's more obscure, it's more ambiguous. So I really tried to explore this by actually trying to find the visual correspondences to the music I was playing. It really started from that, and also the fact that it was outside. Also was also, and it still is with festivals, the idea that in days we are so connected, and it's even more now, we are connected to the world through screens, through virtual means. The idea of sharing the same event, shoulder against shoulder, and as a community spirit, as a community event, is something that, and then you know that you have no second chance, you can't go back next Saturday to enjoy it. Creates certainly something special that probably explained the big success of these concerts, these outdoor concerts.
You know, the success that you had at that time really enabled you to do a lot of experimentation, both in recording and performance. And you were the first guy to go to China and do shows in Beijing and Shanghai, and I know you've been back since, and you're probably going to go again. You ran into a lot of red tape that first time around as well, didn't you, with trying to pull off something like that in what was then a little bit more of a restricted society than perhaps it is today. What did you learn from trying to take that music into a situation, I guess, that was just so unusual and so different? You're taking it into communist China. What did you learn from that?
Actually, the first time I played there it was like playing on the moon for both sides. I mean, people were. Because I went with a pretty new or revolutionary type of visual concept and concert that could be new on a New York point of view, or London point of view, or Paris point of view. And in China, they've been cut in the mouse time for 30 years from everything coming from the West. So for them, it was a shock. And also obviously for us, the whole team was also something amazing to be in such a place where everything was different. And I mean, I think which is interesting is actually to learn. It was a learning process for me to think that, you know, we are here talking about technology and instruments, and actually by the end of the day in China, I really realized that whatever the instruments you use, whatever the technology you use, by the end of the day, the music is working or not. You know, and also whatever the number of the audience you are playing in how big the audience, how small the audience is. By the end of the day, it's a very strange chemistry between two entities, the audience and the stage, and that works or it doesn't. And it's very, very special how you know, it's like on a tour. You play more or less the same kind of tour concert. Personally, I'm trying not to repeat myself too much from one concert to another, but it's more or less the same kind of, during a tour, the same kind of project. But actually, every night is different, depending on the audience, depending on this very special chemistry. And whatever you play, you can play on the guitar with symphonic orchestra, with a jazz trio, or with synthesizers. I mean, the music works or not. And it's really what I realized in China, because these guys, in those days, they had actually no idea about these instruments. I mean, we came with the early samplers and very strange machines for them. It was culturally something not linked to music at all. And it worked because I think that also the melodies, the music was, in a sense, something that they could receive emotionally, probably.
I read somewhere that on one of those concerts, those early concerts, they were so not prepared for the amount of electricity that you would need that they had to shut down the adjoining neighborhood to make sure you had enough.
Yeah, I realized I knew it because they didn't say, but I heard later on that it was in Beijing actually. The first concert I did in Beijing, they switched off part of the city to give us the right amount of power. I don't know if these guys knew that I was responsible for it. But I never told them, so I'm still alone in the country.
They know now. Yeah.
I know now.
You know, through the years with live performance, you've done some amazing shows, and you've played the London Docklands, the Egyptian desert, back to China, Tiananmen Square, Moscow. There's a long list of places, but you've only ever played here in the United States once, and I believe that might be about to change. So we're leaking this. You know, everything's leaking these days. We're leaking this a little ahead of a press an announcement that's going to be tomorrow. But you've only played in the States once before. It was in Houston. It celebrated Texas's 150th anniversary back in 1986. 1.5 million people. I'm sure it was fantastic. And you tied into NASA as well, an anniversary with NASA. But you're going to be kicking off the US tour, and I hope I remembered this right, guys, in Toronto on the 9th of May, and doing 10 dates, which will culminate here in Los Angeles at the Microsoft Theater. On the 27th of May.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm guessing tickets go on sale tomorrow. The announcement goes out tomorrow. First of all, how fantastic that you're going to be performing here in the States. And you're going to be playing Radio City Music Hall, some fantastic venues. After all these years, how does it feel to be actually coming to the States and mounting a tour?
Quite fresh. I feel quite fresh because actually it's strange because a few times we were talking about touring in America, and for different reasons, and not because of United States, but for different reasons I was involved in different projects, and all these big concerts have been like film projects. Sometimes it took me 2 or 3 years to stage, plus some albums, and I must say that the first concert was so special. I would like to have a quick word about this. I mean, the Houston project is probably one of my most memorable concert of my life, because it was, for the first time NASA was involved, and by total coincidence I was was like in a fantasy world, and we was in the middle of NASA talking with the astronauts. So what could we invent and create for this concept? For the first time of its history, NASA decided to be involved in a cultural event, and then we decided that one astronaut, Ron McNair, should play live in the timelessness of space, live with us on stage. And we prepared everything. NASA was equipped the whole shuttle to film the whole thing. I mean, for the transmission, it was pretty sophisticated, obviously, technology, especially in those days. And unfortunately, it was a challenger, and the whole project obviously crashed, and we became very good friends with Ron and with the old astronauts, and I was absolutely, everybody was in tears, and I said, okay, I give up, I don't want to do the concert, it's nonsense. And all the astronauts from NASA called me and said, you have to do it also for the astronauts and for them. And then this concert became something extraordinary, because it became far more than just a concert. It became also a tribute to these heroes, modern heroes. And this is the reason why this concert is so special to me. And also the whole thing, we had 1.3 million people, the federal highway has been blocked on 7 miles. I mean, it became insane, and it's still, I think, the biggest crowd for a concert in America, still today. And obviously this is an unforgettable moment to me, and I'm really looking forward to go back to America with this brand new tour. It's something I started. It's a concert project I started 9 months ago in Europe, and I just finished 50 gigs over there. And I must say that we are all very excited. It's a very, very interesting project. I mean, the music is also pretty different. It's new arrangement of new tracks, but also some of the tracks in Oxygen rearranged. But the visual, I'm not saying this for any kind of, but for purely artistic reasons. You have to see it to understand what it is, because on YouTube these days we can see everything, and we sometimes have the feeling that because we are seeing it on YouTube, we see what it is. Sometimes yes, but in that case you have really to share the event live, because it's I did the scenography, and I designed this project in a kind of I had in mind this kind of how to visualize the way I'm doing music. And when I do some music, I try to create some landscapes, some soundscapes, some architecture of sounds, creating some perspectives, and how to do this on stage. And I always thought that 3D would be great for that, but I hate 3D with glasses. I think it's the dark age of 3D. I mean, it gives you headaches, and I'm able even to pay more for watching a movie in 2D than 3D most of the time. You're losing brightness and so on, or what we know. And in that case, we conceive something which is a 3D without glasses, with a kind of layers of screen. It's very special, and I was really scared that it won't work at all. And the first rehearsals, we were really blown away, because it's really working it's very strong, and I think that it also, I mean, work with the music. I was looking for this kind of project and correspondence almost for all my life, to try to find a way to go beyond just having a series of video clips, I mean, illustrating songs. What you see so much in concert these days. I had really something different in mind, and I think it works really well. We had fantastic reviews and fantastic welcome in Europe, and I'm very excited to share this with you all and with this US tour. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really excited.
The music is going to be...
Thank you.
The music, as you said, is going to be a combination of earlier work and music from the new album, and of course electronica. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because Electronica 1 is Grammy nominated for Best Dance and Electronic Album.
Thank you.
And I know when, I have to tell you, I met Jean-Michel probably around this time last year, maybe, we had a conversation.
Yes, even.
And when he asked if I would do this, I was delighted to, as you can see, to hang out with him because he's cool. But when I met him today, when he arrived, he told me that he'd been in Shanghai 3 days ago, and then he flew to Paris, and then he flew here, and he drove here from the airport, and then tomorrow he's going down to Nam, and then he's going back somewhere else, and then he's coming back for the Grammys, and I was like, this guy's my hero, you know? So congratulations on the nomination, obviously.
Thank you.
And I want to talk a little bit about that project as well. Are we okay for time, everybody?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about that project, because when we first met, that's what we talked about. And you had mentioned a little bit in the earlier part of this conversation about working with Air. And some of the other people, the collaborators that you worked with, you ended up doing 2 albums because you did so much. And I know it took you a long time doing all these collaborations. But you also used a mix of old technology and new technology. As you mentioned, with the Air song, you went back and dug out a lot of old equipment. And I know that you've mentioned in the past that the new technology and the access to unlimited tracks is fantastic. But the thing that I read that really sort of spoke to me was you were talking about how a painter has 4 tubes of paint. And if they have 4 tubes of paint, then they know what they're working with, and they have somewhere to start and somewhere to go and something to create. But when you have 1 million colors, by the time you got to the 1,000,000th, you've forgotten what the first one was. So in the bringing this into the making of music with the technology that we have today, there's so many options, so many ways to cut the cake, so to speak. When you started with Electronica, with that project that turned into 2 albums, what did you really want to do apart from working with these other people? What was the technological achievement of making this music and these albums?
These are very interesting questions.
Finally, right?
Questions. The two points you really raised, and they are very interesting points. Is the collaboration process. How do you collaborate these days in days where we have most of the time people are featuring artists in their album, and it means that they're sending files to people they would never meet, they would never talk to, and more sometimes for marketing reasons than anything else. In the case of Electronica, I really wanted to gather around me people who have been a source of inspiration to me on different generations, 4 generations since I started. And then also physically sharing the creative process with them. And so I traveled a lot. It took me 5 years to do these 2 albums, because actually at the beginning it was like for a birthday party. You invited friends, and you don't know how many people will come, and then they all said yes. So